Ready? Yeah. I'm sorry?
Is there another sefer?
You can make a copy. We don't have a sefer. No.
Copy?
Make a copy. He'll make you a copy. Where are we going to start? We'll go back, if you'll just to have continuity, just briefly. We'll go back to the previous page on Ayin Ches on the bottom. 3 lines from the bottom. So we'll know what we're talking about, and then we'll just go. We're not going to elaborate extensively. Okay. Right, so we'll start 3 lines from the bottom on page Ayin Ches. Even though we already learned, we went to the next page, but we didn't have a chance to discuss it sufficiently, so we'll go back just to get into it. Okay, 3 lines from the Kol Shikein Bechinas HaDibur Ho'elye. Surely, the Dibur Ho'elye, that which we call the speech from above, because we said that the neshama, even the neshama that is in the group of the person, that gives him life and he experiences all the time, and there's no way that he can understand what that neshama is, what kind of entity is this, even though he clearly knows his presence. Surely the Dibur Ho'elyon, the Asora Ma'amoris, of the Asora Ma'amchaye Umehave Me'ayin Le'yesh, that brings into existence Me'ayin Le'yesh, a total and from nothingness into being. Kol Hishtalsus HaNivroim Dibiyah, the entire development of the Nivroim Abiyah, and this is all from Dibur Ha'elyon. Ein ono masigi mehuz hadibur mahu. We do not and we cannot comprehend what type of Dibur it is. What kind of presence is this? Ki im mitziyusoi, only mitziyusoi, its presence, its existence, murgeshes, is sensed, ki'ilu roya mamush. It's sensed so clearly, ki'ilu roya mamush, as if he were to see it with his eyes, like you would actually see it. Because this principle that the Nivroim, the entire creation, the entire world, is a yesh meyayin. What's meant a yesh meyayin? So we discussed, it's a yesh, it's a presence, but it's a yesh that cannot substantiate. What substantiate means? Justified its own existence. On what basis? What makes you be here? Who called you here? I mean, may I? Therefore, there is a koyach, some kind of a koyach that brings it into being. This koyach is called the Dibur Ho'eli, the Asorim Amoris. The reason that this is called Dibur is that it makes these creatures, it makes the world a palatable and a definitive presence. Something that can be recognized as a presence on its own. This is the difference between thought and speech. Machshava and dibur. Thought, everything that comes out in speech is present previously in thought. You can't speak without first thinking what you're going to say. Except when it is in thought, it is on a different level. It cannot be discerned. It cannot be identified as a presence. There are different levels of thought. But all levels of thought, even the most expressive, when a person thinks actual words, let's say if you're reading the words from here, without pronouncing it, you're reading with what's called the eye reading. You're reading word for word. Can somebody tell what you're reading? By looking at you? By listening to your thought? It's not a presence. Surely a thought that comes from inside cannot be discerned at all. It's not a presence. When it comes into speech, then it becomes a presence. This is why it's called dibur. Because the world is a real presence. And this dibur is what creates the world. A real creation gives it a real presence. Yes, may I? What type of force is this dibur that is able to create the world Yesh Me'ayin is something that we cannot comprehend. Although we clearly see that Ki'ilu Roya Mamash, when we reflect on the existence of the world, that it comes into being. It's not something that's just there, it comes into being, something makes it be. This is something which we already discussed last week. And to perhaps even substantiate it even more and to make it even clearer, to recognize that the inner from Yesh Me'ayin, the Dibur Ho'elim, that there is a creating force. Ki'ilu Roya Mamash, it's like you would see it happen. We are taking the world, so to speak, for granted because we are used to it. The Baal Shem Tov says that the word teva, nature, actually, there is no such a koyach as nature. The whole meaning of teva, the word teva comes from the word tubu, being sunk in. Because you were so accustomed to it, So it becomes like a presence, a real presence. Tubu b'yamsuf. Tubu b'yamsuf. No, tubu b'yamsuf. It's the habit that makes it real. But in reality, if you think about just the following phenomenon, you put your mind to it, and you say, look, I'm looking at this book. And it's right here because I'm looking at it. I close my eyes, it's not here anymore. I open my eyes, it's still here. So, what kept it being here while I turned away from it? Why was the book here when I turned away? It was here for some other reason than the fact that I'm looking at it. There's a koyach that maintains the world's being, so that even if I turn away from it, it continues to be there. It continues to be because there is this koyach eliki that holds it up. And we rely on it. We say, if I leave the book here, if I come back, it's going to be here. This is something, when you reflect in it, clearly you recognize that this is not because the book is here, but because there is a koyach eliki that maintains the world. And we pointed out, I think, last time, that the most obvious moment of this phenomenon is when you reflect on the sun. When the sun produces so much energy, enormous amount of energy. But naturally, something that produces so much energy should burn up. It should, so to speak, lose its energy. And yet, for thousands of years, this little ball over there continues to produce this energy without interruption, without effect. It's an amazing thing. I once spoke to Professor Brandauer. You heard Professor Brandauer? He is a professor. He's involved in solar energy. In solar energy, capturing solar energy for use, for practical use. So I asked him, look, if you're going to capture solar energy and translate it into home heating or anything like that, aren't you going to change the atmosphere? Because you're going to take some of the heat that the sun lives in the world, and you're going to capture it and use it for other purposes. This is so insignificant you wouldn't believe it. To capture the solar energy to the point where it should have an effect is beyond the dream. It's impossible. That's how much energy it produces. And it's not dissipating. That clearly shows you are expecting the sun to be here tomorrow, exactly in the same place as it is here today. And with the same intensity, exactly. On what basis? On the basis that the Abba wants it like this. And that's how it is.
Even more so, now we're scared of global heating.
That's right. It's even worse, right? Instead of cooling down, it becomes hotter. This is something which we, as I said, take for granted, but if you reflect on it, the reason that this is so reliable because we sense that there is a koyach that maintains it. This has to be honest. And to the extent, shall bechinozu, at the end of this page, al bechinozu, regarding this bechino, this element, Eino shayach emuna. The term emuna is not applicable. Eino shayach emuna. Kiyim, and this is what we started discussing last time, and I want to discuss this broadly. Kiyim bechinas das vehakor. What is applicable to this phenomenon of the koyach eliki that maintains the world? Not emunah, but das vehakor. Das, the koyach hadas, which we'll discuss a little bit, and hakora in cognizance. Emunah applies to something that I have no personal experience of, and I have no personal contact with. There is nothing that tells me it's there. Nothing in my personal experience that points me to that thing. That's what emunah. But something that I can experience, and my das. I mean, we discussed many times in das, even last time when we learned this, and I want to do it again. Das is chokhmah bina v'das. So briefly, chokhmah and bina are the two faculties of seichel, whose function it is to identify the truth and to comprehend and understand it. Now, when you open a sefer and you learn, there are two general levels at which you understand what you learn. One is you learn what it says in the sefer. You read the words, and you say, this is what it says, and it makes sense, and I can translate the words, I can make sense of them, and I can explain what it says. Then there is another level. What is it talking about? Now, it's not just the logic of the words themselves, but what is it talking about? Like, for instance, you learn that if somebody finds a lost article, you have to return it, right? So somebody asks you, what did you learn? If somebody finds a lost article, you have to return it under certain circumstances. Now, there's another level. Can you relate to this deen? Does it make sense to you? Why do you have to return it? It's lost. Why can't you take it for yourself? So this other level, this is where you are you are relating what you learn to yourself. But it's your seichel that understands it. And your seichel says that if you find a lost article, it makes sense that you should return it. Okay? This second level, this is something which is called das. In other words, this is something which is part of your own thinking. It's no longer something that you learn because it says so, but it really relates to the way you think yourself. The ultimate inyan of chokhmah, of learning, is that you should develop your own thinking to the point in such a way that it makes sense what you learn. Like, for instance, you're learning how to say the Rebbe creates the world. So first you learn that in the Chumash, and then that makes you reflect on the way you think of the world. So yes, of course the world was created. That's called das. That becomes, so to speak, your own knowledge. But this which you learned in the Chumash now became your own knowledge. This is the way you look at the world. And it's obvious to you that the world was created. This is called das v'hakora. That you recognize so to speak, from your own reality, that this is the way it is. The reality of the world, our own reality, the way we think of the existence of the world, and the way we relate to it, and the way we operate in it, the way we live in the world, includes this principle that there is a creator in the world.
When we learn Bereshit Bara, and then we think about it and say, yeah, it makes sense. What aspect of that is Das and what aspect is Hakara? What's the differentiation once it clicks? Like it makes sense.
Das and Hakara. In this instance, it is the same thing.
Okay.
Okay. The difference in Das and Hakara is Hakara is when you look at the world, you recognize it. Das is when you close your eyes, you know the same thing.
So that's deeper. Like a higher level of knowledge.
Yes, in a certain sense. I mean, there's no Hakara without Das. There's no Das without Hakara. But Das is like more internal. If I see you, I recognize this as you. When I close my eyes and I want to picture what you look like, that's Das. So, Chochmah, Bina, V'das, even though Chochmah, Bina, this is the koiches that we're constantly celebrating, that this is the miraculous koiches, you can have an insight and understand and so forth. The real element that defines a human being, but that differentiates a human being from the rest of the world, is the Das element. The real thing is the Das. Because in the Das, this is where a person actually senses the reality. This is why when we describe a person, we talk about a human being, say he's a mature person, we say he's a bar das. That's the expression, he's a bar das. Why don't you say he's a bar choch, bar bina? You don't say that. You could say that he is smart, but that doesn't describe the person. That's good. This is one of his faculties. But a bar das describes a person. He's solid, he can be trusted, he recognizes the importance of things. That's a das. So I said multiple times lately that there is, when you go to school and you learn, you study whatever course of study you do, and then at the end of the course you get a test. And the test is a list of questions on paper that you have to answer the questions. And if you know the answer to the questions, that means that you have passed the course. That's called Das, right? You learned, you studied. Now you know the answer to the questions. So this is a knowledge that's enough to pass the course, to answer the questions. Das, the real Das is when you can pass the test of life, not the test of a course on a paper. Just like a doctor. A doctor goes to school and he goes through all kinds of tests, and finally he gets his PhD. He gets his approval that he has passed the course. He's not a doctor yet. Now he has to practice for many years. After he practices for many years, and he has real life experience, feel for the person, then he is a doctor that you can trust. A doctor who diagnoses a patient on the basis of, oh, it says so in that book, it says so this, that's not a doctor. A doctor is the one who feels the case. The same thing is a Rav, who has a Paskin Shaila. A Rav asking Paskin Shaila, he has to have a feel for the Shaila. And there's so many different aspects of the Shaila, even the circumstances. Who is asking the question makes a difference in halacha. So a Rav has to be able to feel the entire circumstance. That's called das. A Rav who is not a bardas, but a big lamban, but not a mensch, is a terrible thing. It can be a terrible thing. It can be very detrimental to the health of the community.
So Rabbi, that's why a Rav has to go through shimush?
That's right. There has to be shimush. That's right. He has to be a shimush. He has to work together with an experienced Rav for a long time, until the Rav says, "Okay, you're okay. You can take it." And that's why he gives it yodin. He gives him a piece of paper that attests that he is not past the test, but past the test of time, of life. Ki'ilu roya mamush. So this is something. That's why I call it ki'ilu roya mamush, as one would be actually seeing it. Mibsori echze elaka. As the Pasuk says, Mibsori echze elaka. For my flesh, I see God. For my young flesh, which means this is something which I experience. It's important that we discuss this, because really this is the important thing of learning Torah, learning yeshiva. And we're living in a time where this element has been eliminated from human life. And it's become so prevalent and pervasive that it permeates every person. Even a yeshiva who sits and learns, it also permeates it. Because everything is being judged entirely on an empirical level. You know what empirical level means? On a physical level. Prove this, externally. This is called Chochmah Chitzenis. Chochmah Chitzenis is a very powerful tool to figure out Chitzenisike things. But when Chochmah Chitzenis becomes a test for reality, becomes your sense of reality, this is what the Rebbe says, it's metamei hamoyach. It makes the moyach impure. What is the meaning from Tuma? I really would like to be able to understand. Metamei hamoyach means it makes the moyach impure. What's impurity, Bichlal? Impurity is an intangible thing. Somebody becomes impure. Physically, he's the same person. Come on. You're too young for that. Physically, he's the same person. What's impurity? Impurity is that he cannot, a person who is not pure, he cannot go into Beis Hamikdash. There is some kind of barrier between him and Kedusha and holiness. The same thing when you have the moyach becomes impure. Moyach, the Chokhmah is the window to the neshama. This is where a person senses that there is life in him. There's life in the world. When that whole element is being eliminated and is being blinded and saying, no, the only way you can really ascertain things is if you can measure it physically. In other words, you have to be blind and insensitive. That's when you're going to know the truth. What truth? A lifeless physical truth. What about life? What about the human perception? That's completely eliminated. Where in fact the real truth is that only the Chokhmah, only the human being can know the truth. Because the physical appearance and all the physical world element, this is all Chichenis. This is not the real thing. This is what happened in the secular world, that they have decided that everything has to be proven empirically, physically. And therefore, if there is a physical world, then it has to have had a physical origin. Because the spiritual origin I don't see. If I don't see it, I can't measure it, then it doesn't exist. So what happened to the world? It's all, the whole concept of the world is that it evolved from itself. And this causes us to lose contact with the life element in the world.
How did they say, like, thought and feeling and emotions? How did they say that exists? Like, it's not physical. There's no proof for that. I don't know.
There is endless, proofs and so forth. The problem is that when you go into Chokhmas Chitzonius, you lose the sensitivity to that. And there are all kinds of different ways that everything is being what's called explained away. Explained away. Explained away means there is no mystery. There's nothing beyond anything that you cannot measure and understand. Excuse me, everything chemical, electrical pulses, whatever it is. It's really a horror story. The real human being is this das and hakora, and then nipsori echzer lakab. Then you have a sensitivity to alakus. You don't know what alakus is, and anybody who says I saw God, you know that he is a little bit off the wall. But echzer lakab, to see that there is God, that there's a godly element in existence. That is obvious. All existence has a godly element. There is a sense of infinity in the world. Like for instance, when we look out into space, we don't see the end. And we don't expect to see the end. There is no end. We're looking into endless space. Now, the truth is, yes, we perceive it that way, but we cannot see endlessly, because there's a limit to our eyes. Well, right? We cannot see endlessly. So where do we get the sense that this is endless? The space itself is a presence, and any presence is cumulative. If it's cumulative, they accumulate. In other words, if there's a mile, then there is 2 miles, or 10 miles. You cannot create an infinity number of miles. Such thing doesn't exist. Infinity is not a composition of many finite elements. Doesn't work. Infinity is a truth in itself. If I'm looking at space, how can it be infinity? If you think deeply into your own thought, and you look, so to speak, into space and say, I see infinity, you're not seeing infinity in space. What you're seeing is that there is a koyach behind that space that creates it, and that koyach is infinite. That koyach is infinite. There's no way that I can reach the end of space, because if I reach the end of space, that koyach will create more space. Because he's infinite. You know the expression, there is more where this came from? A person has a certain amount. And that gives you a certain sense of security. I have this amount. The real truth, that doesn't give him a sense of security. What gives him a security? That there is more where this came from. That gives him a sense. I once explained, I remember when you talked about it last week, the serpent. Remember talking about the serpent?
With us?
Huh?
With us?
Yeah, no? I fixed so many different groups, so I don't remember.
Yeah.
I want to explain to you, though, there's a very important, interesting phenomenon with the serpent. The serpent was punished by the Meibesh. He was the instigator of the whole crash in the world. And the Meibesh punished him. And what was his punishment? You will crawl on your belly. And the Mephorshim said that originally he had legs. The serpent had legs, and he was very smart. And he fell down, he lost his legs. He goes on his belly. And you eat dust throughout your lifetime. Right? Now think about this. The serpent is walking on his belly. Who is more secure? One who is on the belly or one who is on legs?
On the belly.
On the belly.
Can't fall down.
It can fall down. Right? It's a blessing.
He stepped on.
Stepped on. He steps away. He hides out. But there's no comparison. He's on his belly. He can't fall. The human being is the most vulnerable of all creatures in the world. Because he stands on 2. He really has to balance himself. The serpent is the least vulnerable. Right? So it's a blessing. You cannot curse. Then you will eat dust throughout your lifetime. What does that mean? That wherever he is, he wants lunch, it's right there. His food is right there everywhere, all the time. The Rebbe should curse him, the Rebbe should bless him. He doesn't have to be concerned.
You could have told him you'll eat cake your whole lifetime.
But the point is, he doesn't have to be concerned. And he's satisfied eating dust. He doesn't need anything better. What is the actual fact? The actual fact is that the serpent of all the creatures in the world is the most venomous and angry creature.
Angry?
Yeah. But every creature, like a lion, a lion is like the king, he might not touch unless he's hungry, he just bypass. Every animal has that element, except for the serpent. He's angry, he's jealous, he's constantly, he's venomous, he's got a venom. By definition, the serpent should be the most tranquil, friendly, because he had nothing to worry about. You can't take away his lunch. You can't make him fall. How do you explain that? And this is a curse. The curse for the serpent was that he lost contact with Hashem. He lost contact with Hashem. Maybe she said, you wanted to be whatever it is, you wanted to be in the Klippa, you be completely on your own. So now, the serpent is looking at the earth. He's got his lunch in front of him. What is his concern? What is his concern? His concern is, what will happen after I eat up the whole earth? It sounds like a joke, right? It's not a joke, because it's not a question of him eating up the whole earth. The question is that he has his entire world, his entire existence is within a finite parameters. He does not perceive anything infinite. He doesn't relate to anything infinite. You know, the lion wakes up, the bear wakes up after a long winter snooze. He wakes up and he starts running the world and making noise. Where's my food? Where are you screaming to? Everywhere, you know. Every animal relates to the whole world. There's some kind of sense of bigness, of infinity, except for the serpent. He doesn't have that sense at all. His whole orientation is limited, even though the earth is his domain, is his food, but it has an end. As a result of that, he lives, so to speak, in a confined, limited world. And this is why he is so venomous. He can't relax. He doesn't have a sense of infinity. Relaxation, pleasure, is all based on infinity. This is what I'm saying, that the sense of the bigness and the richness of the world that we perceive is not in the world itself, but because it has an infinite resource behind it. And everything will replenish, everything will rejuvenate. This is what we experience. You know, there's an interesting thing. This is clear. This is mamash, not ki'ilurei mamash, but you see it with your eyes, but you don't pay attention. We feel pretty secure over here, sitting by this table and our chairs, that are standing on the floor. The floor is being supported by beams that are being supported by the walls of the house. Right? The walls of the house are being supported by the foundation of the house. Foundation is being supported by the earth. And the earth is being supported by nothingness. It's a bit of nothingness. No, nothing, infinity. You can't fall off the earth. The Eibishter keeps it hanging on nothingness. And that is the biggest sense of security that we have, not because the earth can support us. Because every human being, every creature relates to infinity. You know, the human being more than all, of course. Because he actually can so to speak, conceptualize this. It's part of his das. Part of his das. That's why a human being is able to forego. You take away his obstacle. You take away from an animal. He can't control him. He's going to go after you and eat you up. Human beings, okay, forget it. I have an infinite resource. He can suffer and tolerate almost anything. He can recuperate from any situation. Because you can take everything away from him, but you can't take the Eibishter away from him. Infinity. And he will always replenish. Look what happened to the Jewish people given to us after the war. They left with nothing. Emaciated, the whole nation was emaciated. And all their wealth and everything. Rebuild it again and rebuild it again. That's the richness. That's the real thing. This is the real meaning of saying rely on the Eibishter. We live in a completely different set of parameters. This is called Das and Hakor. That there is, that the world is supported by God. A human being who has Sholem does not have that Das and Hakor, who thinks that the world is really an evolution of some kind of chemical or physical processes, okay, is a spiritual cripple. He doesn't live like a human being. He doesn't have a human experience.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
A goy that doesn't have a nefesh elokis, could he relate to the
Yes, sure.
to it anyway?
Of course.
Any other way?
Of course. Of course. That's why a goy also has 7 mitzvahs, because a goy can't relate directly to the Eibishter, but he knows the world is not his. The world is a created entity. He came here as a guest, and he has to respect it. That's natural to a goy too. And Amunah doesn't apply here. Amunah is something completely unrelated to human experience element. And that is a special koyach and neshama that a Yid has, Amunah. What did it say by Avraham Avinu? The first time mentioned in Torah Amunah is by Avraham Avinu. When the Eibishter promised him that he's going to have a huge nation coming out of him. And Avraham Avinu didn't have the beginnings of it. He can't say, I sense it, it's there. I have one son, and from this one son will be a big nation. He's already coming in years, and it's never happened. And the Rebbe is telling him, you're going to have a son miraculously, and you're going to be a big nation, as you can't count them like you can't count the stars. There it says, Emunah, Hamin Basha. Because there's no beginning, no basis for this promise. This is something which Rebbe is going to make happen, so he believes. This is a koyach ha'ayid that's deeper than das v'hator. Das has to have something to relate to. But the union that Rebbe creates the world, and the Eibishter maintains and that we live in Hashem's world, this is something which is Das V'Hakol. We can learn about it and understand it and elaborate on it and so forth. But that's not to substantiate it. This is just to clarify what we recognize, which is very, very, very important. Okay, we now have another 5 minutes, I think. Okay, so we'll go to the second line from the top on Ayin Tes. V'nimtzo, thus it comes out, Kegam b'china zu, d'yesh meyayin, that even this element, which is called yesh meyayin, even though that this is yesh meyayin, this is something which we experience right in front of our own eyes. Gamken, even there, lahasig hamahus. It's not possible for us to comprehend hamahus, the real essence. What type of power is it that creates the world? Kiyim idiyas hametzius. The only best that we can have on it is idiyas hametzius. We know of the truth of it. We know of its presence. That we have a clear knowledge. And not just knowledge from the book, but personal knowledge. We live with it. This is the basis of all our activities. You wake up in the morning and you get out of bed. What gives us the spirit and the strength to get out of bed? This knowledge. There's a real life. If we were to think that we are on our own, like they would want to present, everyone is fending for himself. The whole world, one is against the other. It would be totally the spirit. What's going on? Why should I fight for my existence? Who cares? Well, the existence is something which is substantiated by Elokus, by Rebbeinu. That gives me the chayes to go on. There's real life. So this is something which we actually feel and experience and live with, and yet we cannot comprehend it. The kol shekain, and then surely this whole discussion is for this line over here, because this is what we started saying. You're talking about matzah, that matzah strengthens emunah and strengthens emunah in onoichi, and he explained what is the meaning for onoichi, and this is what comes from kol shekain surely bechinas onoichi. This bechina that's called onoichi. That's the only way to reference it is by the word Anoichi. If you remember, we discussed then, when it was first introduced, that there is Anoichi, Havaya, Lekecha. Havaya and Lekecha, this is also a lakus which we have no understanding of, but we have knowledge of it b'mtzias. Havaya and Lekecha, this is the lakus that's creating the world. Havaya is Yudke Vovke, is also that the Elokus came down into the world and gives chayes to the world. So again, we cannot comprehend what it is, but we can clearly relate to it. It's there. And this is what we live with, as a matter of fact. This is what we live with, as we said before, Das V'Hakol. But Onoichi, Havaya, this is above this scene, above being manifest in the world in any way. We can't experience it in the world at all. This is the Rebbeinu as he is completely unrelated above the world. Hainu bechinas oir ein soif, which is this bechina of oir ein soif, atzmusei umehusoi. His very essence itself. A few more words and then I'll elaborate briefly. She'einei ha'ora be'alma, which is not merely a ha'ora. Again, this canal, as we mentioned before, we already discussed it before, but we will discuss it again briefly. What is ha'ora b'yalma? Ha'ora means a reflection, merely a reflection. A reflection is that element, that part of any existence that lends itself to be observed from the outside. Alakus, there's an oir that shows itself. It can be a very high, very fine, but still it's a ha'ara. Something ultimately it can manifest itself and can be translated and interpreted in a manner that is outside of itself. That's meant ha'ara. But atzmus, this is the essence itself. The essence, the essential truth, the essential being that does not manifest itself at all. Doesn't have a ha'ara. I'm going to take a minute and we'll pursue it next time. We just want to. We spoke many times about this, the sunlight. Do you remember that, right? Sunlight. We can speak of the sunlight at several different levels. There's a sunlight that reaches us on this earth. This sunlight is almost on par with the candlelight. Put up a candle, and you could see the area that it illuminates. It does not eliminate the darkness, it illuminates the darkness. You know the difference between illuminating and illuminating. As a matter of fact, I explained all the time that the way we see an article, we see it because light combines with darkness. We don't see it because of light alone. We see an article because light combines with darkness. How do we see this? Because a different shading. What is the shading? Shading is darkness. If light were applied to this cup from every direction with the same intensity, we wouldn't see it. So this is one level of sunlight that combines with darkness, comes down here. Then there is another element in sunlight. This is what we call day. Day is an interesting thing, day, in our experience, day, even though there is daybreak in the beginning and the middle and the end. So, yes, it changes in terms of how the shade is, which direction the shade is, and so forth. But the fact that it's daytime doesn't change from beginning of the day till the end of the day. As a matter of fact, when the sun sets, all of a sudden it becomes dark, we're shocked. What happened all of a sudden? It was just day. Because it doesn't change. This is light, so to speak, pure light from the sun itself. Then there is that light of the sun, the way it is inside the sun, as the Alter Rebbe speaks in Tanya. The way this light is in the sun, it reflects the sun itself. And that light, not only does it not combine with darkness, that light does not recognize that darkness exists. Because inside the sun, the whole element of darkness doesn't exist. Okay, so far we're still talking about light. Then we go back to the sun itself. The very sun itself that produces this light. This is something which is not light at all. It's not a whole, it's the essence of light. That we have no way to relate to. Huh? That we have no way to relate to. The sun itself. The light manifests itself in one way or another. But this is the origin of light itself. To that we have no way to relate to. It's not light. It's the creator of light. It's the essence. This is what we said, what I mentioned before. That the sun gives off light. And it gives off light indefinitely, without any manifest change. In other words, it's not giving off of its energy because it doesn't diminish. Somehow, this is the koyach elokit that's in the sun. This is what's called the essence. The sun is what's called the etzem behiri. It's the essence of light. It's not a hor. Similarly, when you talk about Lakus, say that this is a mashal of Lakus, that there is the oil, because oil can be on a very high level, even like oil b'toy hashemish, which is absolute oil. Still, this is something which you can relate to because it emanates. You know what emanates means? It comes forth, and there is a way to relate to it. Whereas the essence, which is not light at all, which is this origin of it, that you cannot relate to. That is what we need the Emunah for, because there's no way for us to relate to it. It's called Anoichi.
Why does he call it Oirin Soif as Moshe Moshe? Why Oirin Soif?
The reason we call it Oirin Soif, okay, I will be next time. Register the question.